that Earl Hahn stated in his staff report.
Okay, but no mining has been done there, right?
Correct, no mining has been done, and that's why, because PMI does not authorize mining, so that's the exact point. PMI has been in place there for 40 years without any impact, because no mining is authorized by PMI alone.
Okay.
Yeah. Does staff wish to present any rebuttal evidence? Name and address again. Position.
Yes, for the record, my name is Earl Hahn. I'm the Development Director for DeSoto County, and this is my address, 201 East Oak Street. What I'd like to do is just try to clear the record on a couple of things. Number one, there was an allegation made that staff was unaware that rezoning is a development order, and I'd like to present 3 examples from my PowerPoint on page 2. You can see, and I've highlighted, that we acknowledge that a rezoning is a development order. The same thing occurs here on page 3, when we pointed out that it's a development order and it authorizes no mining. And then also, when we were talking about page 45 and factor 10, we also again mentioned for a 3rd time that it is a development order. So staff is well aware that a rezoning is a development order. The second issue, one of the issues that was raised was the allegation that the definition of reclamation was made weaker in 2015. And I'm putting the definition that was there before the 2015 amendment. And this is the definition afterwards. So you can see that the definition afterwards refers to chapter 378-207. It says it must comply with that. And these are the requirements under 378-207. And then that references that there's a rule that's involved. And the rule is many pages long. There's the table of contents. So you can see that, I'll let you judge for yourself, but I think that the opinion that you would reach is that the reference to the rule and to the statute and then the rule is a lot more complex than just the item that we had before. Moving on, Ms. LaBruna stated that I had gone on a trip with her, which is, I wanted to confirm is true. When we were at the Planning Commission meeting, there was some concern that perhaps I was too close to Mosaic, because I went with Commissioner Hill, for example, on the initial trip to Mosaic to see how the whole process worked, and there were a number of us that went to see that. Afterwards, there was a second meeting that I had with Mosaic on site on their property, where we looked at some of the water issues and some of the discharge areas that we're going to be talking about at some future time. And then there was a 3rd time where I took a flight over the whole area that was going to be mined, including some of the areas in Hardin County. Well, the perception was that I only got to see the rosy side of Mosaic's presentation and didn't get to see the ugly underbelly. And there were a number of people who offered, not only to me, but to the Planning Commission and to Mr. Connie was there at the meeting, that they would either fly us out over in private planes to see that or take us around on a tour. So I took the opportunity to go with Ms. LaBruno to look at these areas that she was alleging. And what she showed me was areas with fertilizer plants and gypsum stacks, none of which are being proposed in DeSoto County. She also showed me some areas where there were moonscapes, but upon further inquiries, we saw many of those areas were prior to in the 1950s and in the early 70s, when there weren't reclamation activities. So it wasn't really, what they were showing us wasn't really comparing apples to apples. And then the other point that I'd like to make is, as we know, reclamation and restoration is an evolving science. And activities that we didn't think were possible before are now occurring. So one of the best examples is the Kissimmee River Restoration Project, where they returned the flow to 44 miles of the river's historic channel, and they restored about 40 square miles of river floodplain ecosystem. And if you haven't been out there to see that, it's truly an amazing experience. I've been out there and seen the work that they've done. The other issue that I pointed out to her, that unlike some of the other counties, what we did here was we separated the rezoning hearing from the permitting hearing. In other counties, they were all put together, and it created the impression that You were rushing to judgment that you were forcing it down their throat. Why would you schedule a permitting hearing if you went to the zoning hearing and the board denied rezoning? Then there's no purpose in looking at the permitting issues. So it was agreed that we would separate these two into these two processes. And one of the advantages of that is that today we've heard lots of testimony of things that we might not have considered if we had all held that in one public hearing. So now when we start to evaluate the permits, some of the issues that were raised today and that were raised by the board, we can now ask our consultants to go out and to look at those. So we'll be proactive in reviewing that rather than being surprised by anything that might occur. Then finally, you had heard some testimony from various peoples about people from economic impacts, such as the number of jobs that were created or not being created, and the lost value of aggregated income, and other items, indirect and multiplier effects of value. And while all of those are interesting and facts and important, they're not really one of the 15 factors that we evaluate in considering the rezoning. I'd like to take just a moment to talk about comprehensive plan consistency. When you look at the GOP's goals, objectives, and policies, we literally have hundreds of them in our comprehensive plan, and it's easy to cherry pick from one element or another and point out and say, it's inconsistent with that policy, or it's inconsistent with that policy. If you were to do that, you could go through any development that you brought forward, you could find a policy that it's inconsistent with and use that as a reason to deny. And that's not how the consistency is supposed to operate. Consistency, when you're looking at the comprehensive plan, you don't look at just one policy, you look at the entire comprehensive plan. You look at it in its totality. So when we look at it in its totality, what we focused on were the goals and objectives and the policies, primarily on the ones that were done as part of the plan amendments, the ones that you did in 2010 and 2015. We also looked at some of the other elements and identified those. When we looked at all of those, the comprehensive view, there were 20 of them that stood out. Of those 20, only 8 really applied to the rezoning. The other ones were related to permitting issues. That will happen when we look for consistency when we get to the phosphate mining plan. So most of the testimony that you've heard from other people, they've cherry-picked 1 or 2 different policies that they've identified, but they haven't indicated that they've done a review of the comprehensive plan and then made a determination of consistency. So I wanted to bring that point out to you. Then finally, there was some information that I have an office in Tampa. It was a surprise to Tom and I. I didn't know I had another job or another a location. And this is a picture of my Florida Bar page showing that my address is here at the 201 East. This is where I get my address. I do not practice law, but I do have a law degree. When I was hired by an MD, and she asked me would I be practicing law, and I said, well, if I ever get caught up and the work allowed me to do so, I'd like to volunteer in the Guardian Ad Litem program to help in the dependency program. But as you know, we've had so much work, I have trouble just keeping up with what I've got, so I don't foresee any opportunity in the future where I'll be able to do that, unfortunately for Judge Brewer. So that having been said, I have nothing further to say.
Mr. Hahn, can I ask just one question, which I normally don't? However, there was a comment made that you work for Mosaic and you're concerned about being fired from Mosaic. Do you have any relationship with Mosaic outside of your duties for the county?
No, I don't. And I might add that I never even heard of Mosaic or phosphate mining until I applied for this job. And Mindy, when she was doing the interview, was talking about Mosaic. I didn't know who they were or about phosphate mining. I was working in South Florida in a small suburban city. We don't have mining there, and it's not, Bone Valley doesn't extend all the way down there, so I didn't even know what phosphate was, much less phosphate mining. So this has been an education for me, and I hope that as we go through the mining process and the permitting, I'll even be more informed and be able to